Okay. No one is online. This is very interesting. And my computer, this one is. So I don't know where everybody is, but. So we are going through Psalm 61 to 65. And I think what we'll do is I'll just have you do 3 of them, and then we'll get back together and do the last 2 together. And so I will have this group back here do 32, as there are a lot of questions. I mean 62. I told you my brain, my mouth don't always connect. You'll just have to. You can do 61 and then 62 and then back here 63. 1, 2, 3, 61, 62, 63.
Is there anyone on Zoom that should do?
No, there's just Steve and me and the room that nobody.
Oh, it's strange.
It's very strange. We always have. But
I can come back.
I know that Karen Schornhorst told me that her granddaughter went home from Awana 6, so she would probably not be on. And so I don't know where the others are, but anyways.
Well,
So you can work in your little groups and then we'll get back together and. But do you normally have like 15, 20 minutes? 10?
let me go get it. I don't have an extra. Let me see if I have one.
Okay, 10 minutes. Pippo, I'm gonna set my
My
timer.
Bible in the bag and it's.
Because otherwise I won't remember.
See, I didn't bring the thing that I carry my big Bible in because it's so heavy.
Oh, yeah.
Until just recently, I've just been using when I come here. Now I use my big Bible at home.
Okay.
So this is just the useful life. This is the New Testament.
One of my it's 60 minutes. Yes, really does. I used to have a playlist on the way to work. I would listen to a lot of Psalms 62 and 63 around the one I used to love. 62.
That's because 61 is outspoken in the morning.
There was a lady that was new
Elegantly about it.
last night. She was saying, you should go to this app and you should say the myth and you comments, then you have more info.
I would hope so.
Your commentary?
Well, he's in the wood.
Yeah.
Because it's in one volume. But he is saying your loving kindness.
Yeah, but the
so-
flashing of the computer is hard to focus on.
When you look at
So
the
number
computer, it just
one?
strains your eyes. I just,
The longing
Within
of his
15
heart
minutes, my eyes
verses
start
1 and 2. I guess my loving kindness comes in verse 3.
You ever had
My soul waits in silence.
Oh, this one did you? You know,
Like
I love
everything.
that.
I'll take the
Because
initiative.
the way
When I
you
get a
express
headache,
some
sometimes
soul
it's
search,
it'll go into my eye.
Just that.
And now I've had
Soul,
When you
just,
were sailing
it's
in,
very
you
intense way.
murdered him all
Look,
day. Like a leaning wall,
and
like
this
a tottering
God's
fence.
power on this life.
They have counseled only to thrust him down from his height.
Yes.
They delight
You
in
are
words.
my God.
They bless with their mouths.
You are
They
good.
have
Good for you.
This
my
is
soul,
you're
wait
my
a second.
sanctuary.
Go a sanctuary and
This is
meet
my
with
rock,
God.
my salvation,
It's not just
my stronghold.
Well, and it doesn't have to be empty.
On God,
He's out in the desert or the wilderness.
the rock,
It
and
becomes,
my
it
stronghold,
becomes
little prayer place.
it becomes
in God.
a holy place wherever he is and he's communing with God. It becomes a holy
God
place.
is a refuge for us.
Which
In
is
a
the
low
good
degree, our only
things
damage.
to remember.
And men of rank are alive.
No.
In the
That it,
balance,
we don't have to be.
they are together lighter than
Yeah.
breath.
Or
Do not trust in
I think
nation
he was remembering
robbery.
his.
If riches increase, do not put your heart upon them.
Seeing God's power and his glory when he was in the
Twice I have
sanctuary.
heard this,
And just
that power
finding that in the
surrounds
desert.
God.
Like I said,
And
so
thou
I was
shalt
thinking,
praise
right.
the Lord, O Lord.
Wherever God is,
Handsome man,
is holy. Wherever we meet him, wherever he is with us, Okay.
Number 2 is.
Oh, should we
verse
just go through the
4.
questions?
That's where I got my loving.
Well, at least you have that one.
Praising him, lifting.
Well, you know,
Well,
people in
instead
church,
of,
you know, instead of like.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
didn't
so
grow
right.
up that way.
I'm still on
My
Psalm
church,
60.
people raise their hands, you know, acknowledging, yeah,
Yeah.
the
That was
communication.
the result of David
I know this
praising
church
God as his
I don't
raised
know that it
salvation
sounds
defense.
That
So,
doesn't include-
I don't think so many times fundamentalists shy away from things that.
those things that he
Right.
placed on that list that God.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem.
I don't
with
have.
it.
Oh,
I can't
I
keep
think
my
that's
hands
wrong.
down.
So this is David.
I'm all yours, Lord.
His own
Right.
actual.
Yes, and I read that it said that lifting up
And
his
that
hands
he
unto
would-
God was
David
an
is
Old
raised
Testament posture of
in
prayer
Right.
and a posture of trust.
Uh-huh.
So he.
Yeah,
he's
I-
going
I
to
didn't
sit
know
down
that.
and cry and listen to
That
his
was in
prayer.
John
God is
MacArthur's
his
commentary.
was his
Oh,
life.
and I have that commentary, but
Always poured out
Even
his
that God
heart.
was his.
I used it on that last chapter. I
Oh.
could not
What
get
I
through
got out of
65.
this one
It is
time
amazing.
was-
Oh my
He says,
goodness.
Yeah,
That was a
met for God only.
It
And in
was
number 5, he says,
cry,
"Okay,
he
oh,
cried
God
not
only."
to
Where
other
does he
gods.
meditate?
Only his love.
In
Not
in the night
fall
watches.
house.
You wanna take the next one then?
Well, he's in bed.
Pardon?
I'm not gonna talk to you.
Anita, do you have two?
He just remembers and meditates
But
upon
not
his
much
God.
information. I
That
have
not
a study Bible and I have
it's
oh,
so
very
often
good
that
on
the Lord bring
I
himself
guess
to
it's
your
verse
memory
3.
when you're
But it
Rest.
talks about a
Quiet,
going off
yes,
and a
yes.
covering
Quiet,
so
quiet,
hard
yeah.
that they made clear.
That they
Yeah.
were
How
weak.
did verses 2 and 3 make
And
clear?
he
I
could
depend on
praise
They were
God.
weak and that they were
I have a
And says,
stable.
I believe because
And
his
that
soul
They didn't have the
utter
proper support.
satisfaction is
Right.
in God alone.
Right,
And
yeah.
I just thought
That's
about
how
how
that
that
is your
David,
perspective
one
of
thing
that
it
this
shapes every
explains is
that
that
you're
he
in.
put his trust in God
It-
rather than in the
Were you the
folly
big I
of
felt?
all those
And in
that
the
also
shadow
so far
of
away,
your
depending on
wings,
themselves.
I will
that
see.
were like
I see
But he
this
knew because he's always running. He's like our
president
wing just enfolding him and
You couldn't
blocking
depend
out
on him because
any
they were
attempt
just, they would go
of
with the
the
wind.
devil
and
or the
one
world
form,
to
but it was
attack.
just that they
He's
were weak.
shielded, he's
and
protected.
stable.
He's like a chip
Yeah,
under
yeah,
a hen's wing.
Yeah.
And
It's
you know
just
that-
continuing.
Cannot be touched.
thought
it's interesting. In my Bible,
Yeah, just-
you know,
Yeah.
and it gives me
the
comfort
last
in
part
the
of it
night.
is talking about David,
I feel like I can
Not
go to sleep
not his
if
enemy.
I'm in the
I mean, I
shadow of
always
his
read that
wing.
as like they're
Because
the
I
wrong
can't
about
have,
this.
the devil can't attack me, give me bad dreams,
But
he was wrong.
keep me from sleep.
Like the eagle wings are just
They're just
covering,
covered.
covering.
I feel the comfort of that protection.
What is keeping the world is ugliness?
Yeah.
World ugliness. Oh, wait, just cast it down.
The lies. Somebody drinking in.
And they bless
Oh,
coming
no.
out.
You can
Our
do
family
that.
person want to take them down.
Consider it, my sister-in-law is in dire straits, but
God has
when I
It's a
was
scary thing.
I don't care. People say
Say
no
nice
things
things
like
with their
this.
mouth.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's
You know,
playing
and-
right.
You know,
I think
even
it
if
is.
I mean, if I have
No.
I have anxiety, especially when I had an animal trying to get in my dog door.
Oh, that would.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
hear,
just
no,
great.
I'm downstairs watching
So
TV
sad.
in my living room and up in the
Okay.
kitchen. I'm
What did it
hearing
mean
this
for
knock
David to
on my
have
door.
expectations?
Well, I
in
got
God?
to the door, but
Yeah.
I could hear it at
For
the
me,
door.
Oh, that was.
Yes.
I tell you, I was terrified.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know whether to get my pistol or my baseball bat. You know, it's
How
like,
their finances
okay,
or
which way to
Human
circumstances
ability.
in life.
Oh,
Right?
It has to be
That's when we find out that
from
God
God.
you know,
The
really
Lord
is.
has control of that animal. Oh, God can make that animal leave.
And we have to wait on him. And as long as, it's not that we're not ever startled,
No.
right?
Oh, yeah.
But that.
Human.
We can
we
be
have to
surprised,
overcome.
we can be surprised, but we're not alarmed. We're not,
well, I knew the thing couldn't get in because See, my outer doggy door,
Expect him to
I threw away the lid. How
Oh,
stupid.
and I
But
think
the
when you
inner
get our
one
knees,
was snapped
when you
shut
got to that
ever
point
since my
where
doggy
God
died.
took us to that
And
level.
so it couldn't get in, but it would
There's-
make a
It
noise
was
trying to
Friday.
get in. It was a
Yeah, it is.
raccoon, I'm sure.
Ooh, no,
And
There's
it's like, not in my
serenity
house,
and
not in my
no,
house.
no.
And it was
We need to
terrific.
remember
Yeah.
that for the next time.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether to sit there and go hide in the bathroom downstairs.
Even when you're in turmoil, going through.
So
chaos,
I'm
you
afraid
still
I-
have peace
that my
and
anxiety
calmness.
got the better of
No,
me.
Lord.
Well, I'm
I
kind of
was
like
just
where
gonna
it
say, that
says.
it seems like every time in here, when
When
he says he's got such terrible
Yeah.
problems, he turns right around and says, yes, but. Yeah.
Relying on the Lord.
My soul will be
Especially
satisfied.
these days.
As with Marilyn had.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
Very
prevalent.
Okay, 5,
It's
I'm
right
on
in
wrong
your
one.
face.
And
Right
I like
I
that
wish they didn't
because,
use the word fat because it doesn't mean the same thing
Yeah.
then
Well,
as it
yeah.
does now.
but I
just-
like that, a lot of times a rich meal will satisfy you more than plain
Let it
something without any fat in it. And
Right.
out is so
Right.
easy.
Right.
Like, you know, like we had some sort of a big feast and the body was so satiated.
Say that again?
There's so
I'm
many.
taking some prescribed essential
Yeah, the
nutrients
promises
and
of
the
God
liquid
versus
come in a liquid form.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I am finding
What do you
Somewhere
suppose
where,
that in my
um,
translation?
my
it says, "I'm
attitude
God,
is
I don't know.
changing.
my
There's
salvation
something
is the
about
next
me.
phrase
I'm
and my
getting
glory rest.
inflammation
What do
medication
you think
in
that
liquid
phrase
form
means?
now.
Where
And so I'm
David
not
says,
hurting like I did. But the essential,
So because of
liquids
that, it didn't
are
matter what
really,
God
they're
did,
just satisfying my body.
whether he
I
was
don't
It made me
afflicted
think
it's
of,
weird.
Well, you found.
I think
long
it's
term.
in Numbers where
Yeah.
God says to Israel,
Yes.
Okay, we better move on.
Whatever.
my
Never
own
did make it.
translation, because I don't know how the verse goes, but he
God
says to
had
Israel,
it was okay.
My
your
soul
glory
part
is
of it.
because of
God
me.
has
Mhm.
salvation.
God says,
That word following hard
God.
is the same
You
word
walk
that
away
when
from
you talk
shelter,
to
you lose your glory.
Hezekiah,
Please, I wonder if that has anything to do with
you're
what
talking
he's
about
saying.
clinging or
Any good
you're
thing I
so
have is because of
like,
you.
but it will
Just,
turn
yeah.
good. I love that. Follow, I so follow hard.
What they meant for evil.
Right hand upholds me.
Okay, let's see.
In his
Let's
un-
just talk about these questions.
Oh,
and
that I
let's
did,
see,
I think John MacArthur said,
um,
in his
what does David
unfailing
admonish the people
commitment
to
to
do?
the Lord.
Oh.
Vanished
From his
from
own
the tabernacle.
experience, what's he say?
When you're clinging to something,
But
it's
knew
because
God would bring him
like
back to
you
his
were being
tabernacle.
forced
because
overboard
God
on a
had
boat and you
instilled
cling
in
to
him
a
such
lifesaver.
kindness
Yeah.
for the
Nothing
tabernacle.
can
For
get
all
that
things,
lifesaver.
for all things,
And
yeah.
it's
Out of
like
your
chickens,
hands,
they
pray for my
seek
sister.
warmth.
Oh, yeah,
And
clinging.
they
Mhm.
do.
And he is so
It's,
deep the whole time.
mom-
I can't
yeah.
think she's saying true.
Okay, number 5.
He's in really good health.
at least 14.
And I was thinking, how did we just die? I mean, I might as well be
All
honest.
of the,
And
There
the-
were,
it kind of hit me just so terrible from the top.
Come on,
I
come
couldn't
on.
understand, God, that's
I
terrible.
couldn't think of an answer.
We're
And
really
just
close to
pouring
the
out
end.
my
heritage
heart.
spoken of.
She lives a terrible life.
Heritage.
Excuse me, how you ladies doing?
Well,
You getting through your questions?
they'll go to the source.
Time is about up, so just summarize it.
I guess what I'm thinking is, what we think, we might as well
That
try.
was kind of
to
Yeah, they kind of know.
Landed on this.
Sometimes I
I
would
flew
say
around,
it out.
around. Oh, yeah.
That too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Someone was
MacArthur
asking
said-
MacArthur had prayed about a family matter that would not allow me to live.
And they said, I don't even.
Yeah.
And they
And I
just
just
lied about it.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
God
They
is
go
our
around the
heritage.
city and spread
Spread
to me bad rumors about women.
And one of the examples
words
that
and
they
what
gave
our hearts
was,
need.
The Levites.
With all that he
People
did,
that had God
We
for
don't
them.
know how to
They
pray.
didn't get
all
it.
the
God took,
battles
you know,
that he
And
won.
it's possible, of course.
And the
And they
Lord is
took
with
care
him
of the
through
tabernacle.
everything, and yet all these evil people
but
are still
like the
lying.
Levites that had God
I love the Spurgeon. Grand use of memory.
Oh, she, yeah. Oh, I thought you said, oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, oh, I'm.
Boaz.
Any moment.
We're devoted to God. I don't try to, when I'm journaling the Psalms, these songs, I don't try to dissect the verse. That's what this is. I do, I read the psalm, I might read it 2 or 3 times, and then I write down what speaks to me.
That's what the journal's all about.
Yeah,
That's
a praise and devotion to God for all what it does to sustain us is brought out here. God satisfies our longing.
So what she's asking is who is in David's heritage? Who is he talking? Okay.
Question 7.
But I stopped reading it. I started writing.
In verse 10.
I felt.
Is that my story?
That was
Right in the
great
same
grandma, grandpa, and then came Obed, and then came Jesse. So that's what he's talking about.
And then
I had no.
Oh.
Think of it.
Like when you come from a line of.
I didn't write anything. down.
Rich man hated
Oh.
Jesus, you know,
I don't care.
Jesus said, we'll sell all you have and follow me.
You probably wrote down more than I
Disciples
did
said, when they are old,
because I just kind of.
so you can raise a couple of words here.
We agree with you.
You look like you wrote down quite a bit too. so-
I just read big things.
Yeah. And I write
I
messages.
just stay away from.
Oh, I can't hurry now, like straight.
All right, ladies, let's come back together. If some of you want to turn around so you can actually see me, that's fine. But wherever you are, we're just gonna stop here and we're gonna go to this group over here for Psalm 61.
Okay, 61, this was supposed to be performed by, stringed instruments. And, let's see. Even though she didn't ask for, verse 1, Matthew, my best friend, said, David cried not to other gods, only his God. And David was not to, he didn't fall out with God because God afflicted him. You know, just because he was in trouble and it didn't seem like God was answering him, he didn't fall out with God. He didn't move away from him.
Turn away. Yeah.
You know, he always stayed close to him. And then, and David, he didn't speak to God in a cold and careless manner. You know, he was very close to God and was never rude or anything like that. He loved God. So that was out of verse 1. Anyway, how do verses 2 and 3 make clear David's decisive nature toward God? Explain the phrase, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And it just said, wherever David was, no matter what distance he was from the sanctuary, no matter my condition, I have the liberty and access to God at any time. His heart is never so sunk, so burdened that he can't go to God and be lifted up. And then the rock was, what was that? When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. He can't get there by himself. He wants God to take him there.
Oh, that's a good point.
And then at that point, he can have some calmness and serenity. what is David's commitment to the Lord as revealed in verse 4, which is, let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. And that's like a chicken who they seek warmth from their mom, you know, and safety under that wing. And that was just an example. But his commitment to God was 100%. No matter what he was doing, where he was, and it was his continual duty to God and to depend on him totally. He banished from the tabernacle. That was his greatest grievance, was he was away from the tabernacle, but knew God would bring him back to his tabernacle because God had instilled in him such a kindness and reverence for the tabernacle, and that was his home. What is the heritage spoken of in verse 5? For you have heard my vows, O God. You have given me the inheritance of those who fear your name. We were just talking about that. God is our inheritance, our portion forever. A peculiar people who reverence and awe God. This is all Matthew, it's not me. Who are pleased with what God gives to them. And like the Levites, they didn't have any they didn't get any land, they didn't get any property, but their inheritance was God. God would take care of them. And they depended on God and not other Israelites, other brothers. So that leads you to those that have God have enough in him. He's all that we need. He's all sufficient. And then Boaz, it said, what do you know about his great grandparents? Boaz and Ruth were totally devoted to God. So it just kind of went down the line. What amazing statement did David make in verse 7? He will abide before God forever. Appoint loving kindness and truth that they may preserve him. That's self-explanatory, I think. What was the final decision that David made in his psalm? That he would sing praise to his God forever.
Okay, and that verse also,
And he gave thanks for the prayers answered.
yeah.
Yes.
And he
yes.
said that he would keep his vows that he had
Yes.
made to God.
Mhm.
So in this the chapter Psalm, it says verses 1 to 3 are like a prayer for security, and then in 4 he's starting to thank God for answered prayer that hasn't happened yet, but he just has such confidence in God that he knows this psalm, which is an overflow of a king praising God, could be when David was at war. It could be when he was running from Absalom, or he might have been thinking back to when he had been running from Saul and wrote this psalm about that time. But whatever it is, it's, I think, left kind of in question, so that we're not focusing on the event, but we're knowing that we can pray this psalm to God for any of our troubles. It applies to whatever we're going through. And that's an excellent thing to do, is to, when we don't know what to say to God, look up in the Bible and find a psalm and just pray that back to God in reference to what we're doing. I know that we have these questions, but what I've been doing is what she started asking us to do, is to journal through Psalm. And what I look for is the names of God, the characteristics of God, and the things that I can pray to God that apply to my life from each of these Psalms. And so David turned to God when he was in trouble. He knew that God was over all. He has experience of him in the past, and so he's applying that to now. I know that when I got cognizance again after being in the coma, I started to realize that many events of my life had prepared me for that time. And if I wasn't so grounded in God and knew that he loved me and he could be trusted, it would have been a much harder go at trying to get better if I would have made it at all. So sometimes we wonder, like, why is this trial here? Sometimes it's a punishment to get us to turn to look back at God. Sometimes it's because he's teaching those around us. And then sometimes it's to prepare us for the next bigger trial. So if you can handle this one, then he can trust you with a bigger one. So, because I mean, it would come anyways.
Oh, dear.
And if I hadn't succeeded in trusting God in some of the smaller things, my trust wouldn't have been exercised enough that when everything was gone, would I have trusted God in that time? Would I have had strong enough trust in him? And that's what I'm talking about, the preparation. The harder times will come, but I think sometimes he gives us the smaller trials to get us ready. And that's the same thing with David. He had to face the lion and the bear out in the field. He had to deal with some ornery older brothers. And then when he dealt with a very ornery king, he was more in tune with God and knowing what God wanted of him. And he wasn't shaken by that. He went to that rock, and that rock is a purposeful place that God has planned to draw us to. So he's a very personal God, making it a shelter, a tower, to place to get away from those that would try to harm us. Okay, so for this psalm, what I wrote in my journal is, thank you, God, for hearing my prayers. I cry to you when I'm overwhelmed, when seeking guidance, and when I need wisdom. You are my rock higher than me, my shelter, my protection, my strong tower. I will trust in you. Thank you for preserving me. Thank you for your mercy and truth. I will praise you. So, Psalm 62.
Well, first thing is we notice that verses 1 and 2 are repeated again, practically word for word in 5 and 6. So it must be very important if the message is there twice. My soul waits in silence for God only. From him is my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. And David covered friends that were associates anyway that were not that were hard on him, an enemy to him, saying things about him that weren't true. Says they delight in falsehood. And then he even talked about riches, not to trust in riches, but he always comes back to trust in God, that he's the rock, the stronghold that's not going to fail.
The psalm is about stillness under stress. How often are we quiet?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big reason why he repeated that. We need to wait for God, do what we know, but be quiet about it while we're doing it, so that we hear. Be still and know. So do you have anything for the other questions there?
We didn't even get through the questions. We
Okay.
were talking a lot about trusting the Lord.
That's a great topic to talk about.
No
Well,
matter what.
I want to mention the bowing wall and the tottering fence. Who has ever seen a wall that has a bow to it? How long is that wall going to last? Not long. So what does that refer to?
That they would, his enemies would be collapsing soon.
Right. So there's going to be destruction. There's going to be collapse. You ever heard of somebody, walking on the fence? That is just a saying that means they can't make up their mind. But if you literally think of someone walking on top of a fence that's broken and about to fall, that gives you the picture of what David's describing here. And he asks, how long will you imagine mischief against a man? The results will be that they will be slain, they will be destroyed like a tottering fence or a bowing wall. So the goal of the wicked is that they want to destroy David. They don't want him to be their king. Lying is their way of life, and they love to hear lies, and they love to meet together to plan evil. These aren't just people that, are just kind of like come across something and then they do it without thinking. These are people whose whole life is wound up in trying to commit sin, to do evil. And so this starts and ends very much the same. It starts with the stillness under stress. It goes to stillness held and shared. And then it goes talking about the shadows and substance. So do not trust in oppression. Don't cheat other people. If you have riches, don't trust in them. And we're just brought from this pathetic situation that we're in the shadows to a firm reality in morality and practice. All power belongs to God. He has the ability to save us and the delegation of earthly powers as he chooses. And so I was going to say something at the beginning and I just thought of it now. Don't think that I understood all of this and that I just this great Bible scholar that could figure out Elisa's mind as well as what the Bible's going on. I have all her notes. Plus I have all my notes. So, this actually was a pretty easy day compared to some of the things I've taught where I had to do a lot of stuff. I mean, I did my own homework and then I looked at hers, but there were some I didn't know. So got them right here. Mine are in purple, hers are in red. So anyways, and then because I like to point out the attributes as I'm going through, question 8 there talks about power, mercy. And you know what mercy is?
Not getting what you deserve.
Not getting what we deserve. That shows God's steadfast love on display. So it's always something you can count on, and it's how he shows others how much he loves them is by not giving them what they deserve. And so, and that refers to all kinds of things, not just not sending us to hell, but not giving us what we deserve for the sins we committed already today. And these are sins of works, either what we should do that we didn't, or what we did do that we shouldn't, and then motives and thoughts. But God is always fair in his dealings. And David ends this psalm with offering God worship. So God is the one who's over all. We should be very thankful that God is merciful. What is your expectations of God? Anyone in the room? Did somebody write down what in the wisdom section?
That he would always hear us, that we can expect to hear from him.
Right.
And might not always be what we want to hear, but he will hear us, and
He will hear and
have our
answer.
best interest at heart.
Mhm.
He cares for us and he loves us.
And it may not be in our timing either.
That's the one that gets me, because I know this is God's will.
Yeah.
Hurry up.
When I fell and broke my shoulder, it startled me, it surprised me, but when I gave it to the Lord, he gave me peace.
Isn't that cool?
I mean, it was totally unexpected, and I was filled with anguish and anxiety
Pain.
and pain and thought, what is going to happen?
But you know that
But
you
when
had
I gave it
peace.
to the Lord, peace came.
But you had peace before you fell.
Yeah,
But the peace you had after was a whole nother
it's
dimension.
a whole nother dimension. My sister-in-law, who at times can just drive me crazy, when I talked to her, she quoted the Philippians passage, in all things give thanks, and then no anxiety, trust the Lord, and she's the one, God love her, she drive me crazy. But it was her talking to me and quoting that scripture that brought about the sweetest peace.
That's so cool.
Even though she
Pour
drives
our
you
hearts
nuts.
Even though she drives me nuts. She's a good Christian woman. Not her fault she drives me nuts. It's my fault.
Lonnie?
I was just gonna say, we have to pour our hearts out to God, trust him. You know,
What David
even
did.
though.
Right. We can do just what David did. David's God is our God. God is great and he will provide. Diane?
I put, he will keep me in the hollow of his hands.
Yep.
That reminds me of
That other
the
verse.
song.
Yeah.
There's a song.
Karen,
Yes.
I think when you pour your heart out to God is actually when you draw closer to God.
Yeah.
Because when you get to the point where you can tell God anything, all things, and you know he's still going to listen to you, he knows where you're coming from, but you can also pour out your heart, not only with your anguish and your problems and all like that, but you can pour out your heart in telling him how much you love him and how much you thank him for all that he has done and is going to do.
Think about how
So-
much of these Psalms are about praise.
Yes,
God.
so it goes hand in hand.
Mhm.
You can just bare your soul, whereas you can't with people.
In the hollow of his hand and under his wing, evil cannot touch us when we're in the hollow of his hand and under his wing.
Yep.
We are shielded, we are protected.
We're
We cannot be touched by evil.
figuratively running to that tower for the refuge and strength. I heard you ladies talking over here about how sometimes people talk bad, say one thing and then they turn and say something else. And I had a friend here at church I thought was becoming a pretty good friend. And she had problems. She'd bring them to me. We'd pray about them. I'd give her some scripture. I thought I was helping her in her life. And then come to find out, she was going around to my friends and telling bad things about me because she was jealous I had so many friends. And she was preying on people that I loved. And some of them fell for it, never spoke to me again to this day. And that was many, many years ago. Others, you know, obviously knew the truth and knew, but it was one of the most painful things because I was so blindsided. I thought she was a genuine Christian lady that was wanting help, and she was making up these problems so that she could find out more, so she could criticize me. And it was just hard.
Yeah, betrayal is hard.
Yeah. And to somebody to do it on purpose.
Yeah.
It's not like you heard something and you told somebody and you didn't know it would hurt me. I mean, that is easily forgivable, but
Deliberate.
but when it's deliberate and planned over months and calculated, it's just, you know, and I don't know if you've had hard things happen. I'm sure all of us have had people say something good to our face and then say something bad behind your back. And it's hard. It is really hard. But in the midst of that all, I knew that God thought well of me. I didn't know when I walked into church who she had talked to, who was all of a sudden not gonna be my friend anymore, not talk, you know, I mean, that isn't like super important to me, but you don't wanna walk up, oh, guess what happened today? And they just kind of, you know, so you just kind of are trying to not have a big issue in the church lobby, but you know, so it's just kind of,
Well,
but
you know, when people really know you, no matter what anybody else says, they're not gonna believe it.
That's right.
some people do though, and you never know why.
Yeah, but they shouldn't if they really know that person.
They shouldn't, but people sin. I had one lady come to me and said, my husband says that we shouldn't have fellowship with you anymore because you're doing this. And so it's not me. I can't. I have to follow my husband. I was like, what?
Oh,
You know their lies and yet, you know, whatever.
Wow.
So, yeah, she was somebody I had known for 20 years. Anyways,
wow.
it is what it is. But David experienced that often, it seems like, from a son to a close counselor to, you know, a father-in-law that should be close to him, and, you know, just on and on. And so whatever you go through, you can go to the Psalms, you can see where David laid it all out there, let everybody know his sin, his heart fallings, and the good times, and he always turned it back and gave God praise. Okay, Psalm 63 is all my longings, the joy and fellowship of God.
Oh, okay, I guess I'm elected. Um, Psalm 63 is such a wonderful psalm, expressing intense love for the Lord. It's just intense love, and it's just so beautiful. Here he was in the wilderness of Judah again, trying to live through persecution. He's running, and the longing of David's heart was his soul thirsting and longing for God himself. And he wanted to see his power and his glory in the same way that he previously, when he had opportunity to go to the tabernacle and experience the presence of God in the tabernacle, right there in the wilderness, he had seen those things. And Sally said, there's a holy place wherever you meet with God. And I just liked that so much, that wherever you meet with God, it makes it a holy place for you. But here of David's thirsting and longing, I want to thirst and long for God like that, for his presence and for him to reveal himself. And David held the loving kindness of God more dear than his life. And he blesses God. He kneels before him. He adores him. He lifts up his hands unto God. And I read a note that said that was an Old Testament posture of prayer and a posture of trust. And I liked that. Now, which way am I going?
Page
5.
Page 5.
Where? Oh, yeah. Thank you. All these pages. What does David meditate in the night watches? And we as a group were talking about, when you're tired and you're getting ready to go to sleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night, what a comfort it is for our minds to go to some aspect of God that has been dear to us, or some aspect of our day that God just was right there for us. And how David did that. He just meditated upon God. He had joy because his soul's utter satisfaction is in God alone. And so it's like when you paint, they always say, if you have rose-colored glasses, you see everything through rose-colored glasses. Well, God is kind of our rose-colored glasses, that we see everything in the light of our walk with him and who he is. And, it says following hard after God. That word following hard, it means to cling to or adhere to and to cleave to. And just that thought is something to really think about. How hard am I really giving effort to following hard after God, and to really cultivate my relationship with God every day? And then David recognized those that seek his soul, that he could be at peace because he knew that God would take care of it. And that if those people didn't come to Christ, they would be destroyed, both body and soul. And question 6 was, as we read the psalm, we see the pain, hurt, and problems that arose because some told lies concerning David. And Karen's illustration of the deliberate lying about her, that gave us a little taste of what happened to David. And can you even fathom people like that? Can you even fathom somebody doing that to Karen or to David? What in the world could be their purpose? But
Jealousy.
yes, yes, and with her it was jealousy, but they just hated the good that David represented. They must have hated the God that David represented. And it says, David's heart will rejoice in God in the midst of trouble. And it's such a good example to us, because especially in the times that we live in, we may be more and more in the midst of trouble. And as we abide in Christ, we will be able to not let the waters over smother us. You know, the waters of all this world just washing over us. And didn't you all really like that Charles Haddon Spurgeon quote where it said, if it were well if we often read our own diaries, especially noting the hand of the Lord to help us in suffering, want, and labor or dilemma. This is the grand use of memory to furnish us with proofs of the Lord's faithfulness and lead us to a growing confidence in him. And it just, you can look back and say, look what the Lord did in this situation when I didn't have any answers. And it gives us confidence that he has the answer for the current one, even if it mystifies us. So David highly valued the wisdom and the worship of God. And this is such a good expression of it.
Very good. A great summary. I wanted to point out a couple things. When it says that David was satisfied with the marrow and fatness, that's more the blessing, the sustenance that God gives. But he wasn't just, okay, you know, but he was like abundantly satisfied. Like, this is great. This is all I need. And he's out running through the wilderness. I mean, he's not living in a palace when he's saying this. So it's just like, wow. And then, so when we're talking about that verse is there, but also this Spurgeon's quote, I think about how when a very low time in my life, I was encouraged to write down something thankful every day. No matter if the world seems to be falling down around me, if everything seemed wrong, I just got this little book, kind of like a journal, which I didn't even know what a journal was at that point, but I just every day date it, write down a child's smile, the sunshine. I mean, sometimes it wasn't like big dramatic things I was thankful for, but it had to be something different every single day. And it got me to looking for those during the day so I could write them. And we got through that crisis and we were going on, and my kids were very small at that time, but apparently my older one was watching me because something traumatic happens. I know it was months, it might have been a year or so later, and he just quietly walked over, opened the drawer of the end table and took out that book, and he said, "Mommy, you need this." Oh dear.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I hear you. But he knew that when Mommy had that book, Mommy was happier. So he won't remember that today, but it was just, he was probably 3-4 years old, but it was just like, I remember that when we were talking about these things of, you know, it's good for us to rehearse. And if anyone is struggling, I often suggest that because that is something that was so helpful to me. I haven't kept up doing it every day all my life, but I do go back and think. I had a friend who told me that she made a shadow box of all the important big things that God did. And some of them seemed pretty small, but to her, it was a revolutionary thing in her life of something she prayed for. And so she got little tiny symbols of what God had. And she made this shadow box and she had it on her wall, and she could go by and like, God answered that prayer and God blessed me there. And, you know, and then it just kept her spirits up and kept her remembering. And so God is a lifeline for us. And that's, if we cannot go to him and cling to him, follow hard after, what do we have? You know, we want to be as close to him as possible so that we are hearing him and we've got the wisdom and the direction that he wants to give us. And in all these things, David keeps saying forever. And David knows he's going to die at some point, but he's trusting in eternity. he realizes that he's going to worship God forever in heaven. And so just the fact that without much of the Bible, David has that confidence. And it's just, wow, we should live like that all the time.
I was just
Karen,
Karen, verse 7
You're,
about
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Diane.
how he sang for joy, and you think all he was going through every day, and in the morning when he woke up, he was singing for joy. He greeted the day with praise. And how do we do that?
It reminds me of a song that I used to have on a record when I was a kid. It was, I will greet the day with singing. I will greet the morn with joy. I don't remember the rest of it, but that little part of that would go through my head sometimes in the morning. Or, this is the day the Lord hath made. I will be glad and rejoice in it. And that would be the thing that would get me out of bed. I just felt like, oh, I could just lay here and not face the troubles. Kathy, what were you going to say?
The shadow box story just reminded me that God really is wanting us to remember the things that he has done in our life, because look at what the Israelites, he had the Israelites do, he had them do the piles of stone, and then the children would say, what does that pile of stone mean? And they would say it, and it just,
How many times did the different people in the Bible go back through the whole history from Stephen to Jude to Peter, you know, in the New Testament, let alone all the people that were closer to the situation, they just kept, and God recorded those, and I'm just thinking, we got this, but you know, we need those reminders. But I thought it was so interesting when Pastor was teaching on Matthew that where those stones were piled in the Jordan is where Jesus went and was baptized. I just thought that was the coolest thing. I never had realized that before. But as they came through and had to trust God and get over to the other side, that's where Jesus went in and came out to do his ministry as an example. And all that was picturing him, which we knew it pictured him, but then he was there fulfilling that picture. But I don't know. I get all excited about those kind of things. What God had in mind, but we don't know. Yes.
I was just going back to where God says to be grateful, that we should be grateful to God and he will protect us, and those who speak lies will be stopped. So, I mean, in this day and age especially, people kind of detest Christians, you know, it seems like it's on the media all the time, you know, people that are Christians, you know, they get shut down, you know, in different places, and really when somebody learns you're a Christian, you know, they don't want to talk to you, and they don't want to talk about Jesus or anything else, but eventually they will show God, well, these people that are telling these lies, like this person that told these lies about you, they're going to show their true colors at one time or another, you know, that will come out, you know, eventually.
Yes. And God's the one that, you know, is the one who, the avenger or whatever, the one that will,
That was revenge. Huh?
yeah, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Anyways, yes, he is the one that we're supposed to leave that with and let him deal with all of that. But let's go on to 64. Measure for measure, oppressed by the wicked, but rejoicing in the Lord. And that is one of the main things I got out of this whole deal. So this is a psalm of David in the wilderness from one of his enemies. And he's saying, hear my voice, you know, in the prayer, and he asks God to preserve his life because he knows they're trying to kill him. It's not just, you know, a game of hide and seek or somebody trying to keep him away. They're in secret council, in insurrection. They are planning an insidious attack against him. And how many things are done behind closed doors in this country that's insidious and, you know, against the government or against others that are trying to preserve our government or our freedoms. And so number one, it says, describe David's enemies. I'm just going to go through the list here, but they take secret counsel against him. They plan to overthrow him. Their tongues are like a sword. Their words are like arrows. And their target is David, and they shoot in secret for fear. They use bitter words. They encourage each other to do evil. They try to secretly lay snares for him, and they think no one will ever see them or know, which obviously God knows. And I'm sure there were many others too, but they search out ways that they can do evil. They love sin. They do it diligently, and their inner thoughts are deep. Every one of his enemies are ganging up together against him and working evil in their hearts. So they have a purpose of hurting him and keeping him from either becoming king or becoming the king again, and using bitter words to blame him for things he didn't do, and suddenly, and so like it's a surprise chat, and it just reminds me of like a stealthy predator of, like an animal out seeking its prey.
Oh, hello.
And so anyways, in number 2 there under 64, it says describe the impact of God's intervention in verses 7 to 9. So this is the punishment that was done for an example to show it a contrast to what I was just talking about. So what do you have there? Anybody have an answer to number 2?
Well,
Yes.
I just love in verse 7, but God. We know that no matter what's going on, but God, eventually he will answer. He will protect us. He will take care of whatever that enemy is. But I just happened to think when I was reading through these lists of things that enemies are like bullies. They clump together. They don't go out usually just one by themselves. They encourage everybody to, well, come on, we'll go get this guy or whatever. It takes a bunch of them because they have no courage. And
When you're talking about but God, a couple years ago, I did a Bible study about all the but gods, but the Lord, but the Spirit, but the Father, all that throughout the Bible, and just thought about the tragedies that are happening, and then but God, because Greg Watson had mentioned to me that I had used that phrase often when we were talking in the lobby. And so when he was dying, I was sending him texts every day, and I started going through all the but gods, which prompted me to find more of them so that, he would have those, and it got so he couldn't respond. But in the beginning, he was so grateful. And I know others were doing other things, but it just was a great study for me to go through. And I have them all marked in my Bible. And so I had that little star there. So thank you, Kathy. But the whole thing of God intervening and punishing and bringing them to ruin, to disgrace, to be fearful when there's no fear, is so that men will consider him. And he does it to draw men to himself. But what's the reaction of those who love the Lord? In verse 10. Diane, do you want to read that to us?
Read the verse.
Yes, please.
Okay. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord and trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory.
And that's pretty much just the answer. They're going to rejoice, take refuge in him, and we should exalt the Lord and thank him. So the wisdom from this chapter is there's a warning for those who lay snares that they might get caught in them, but God knows what's done in secret. And so we should never think we are going to get away with something. We should realize that God's always with us for the good, but also for the evil. And what I wrote in my journal for this is, hear my prayer and guide me when guide what I meditate on, O Lord. Keep me from fear. Hide me from evil and secret thoughts. Thank you for your protection and defense. I will fear you and declare your works, O God. I will think about what you're doing. I will be glad in you and I will trust in you. Help me to be upright in heart. I seek to bring you glory. So, last night, one of the girls told me that, or told a class that when she can't sleep at night, she goes through things that she's thankful for. And so, like, she didn't have a book with them all written out, but she just like starts thanking the Lord for the good things of that day, for maybe what she saw outside, or, you know, and she said before she gets too far, she's back asleep again. And I thought that was good. I usually will pray, like, okay, Lord, I'm awake. Who should I be praying for now? And at times, it's been most all of you in this room that I've prayed for in the middle of the night, or, you know, like I was praying for Stephanie last night. I was up praying for Angelina. I was like, Lord, I got to teach in the morning. I need to get up early. It's like, no, Angelina needs just pray for her. Okay. So we'll go on to this next chapter, the bounteous God. Praise to God for his situation and providence. So this is another psalm or song of David. And Elisa had learned where it was broken up to acts of forgiveness, acts of power, acts of grace. But I found another way that the book I was reading broke up for the first was the God of grace, and then the God of might, and then the God of, then the acts of grace. And so it was kind of like a chiasm where it starts about the God of grace who's forgiving and ends with the acts of grace of what he does with his power and might in the center. And so the scene, if you think back to literature class in high school or college, and they talked about the setting. Where is this happening in history? The time, the place, and, you know, the circumstances. And so that's what she's asking in some of these questions. And so the scene for the first one is the sanctuary or Zion. So what acts of forgiveness? So what words point out that there is forgiveness in verses 1-4?
Praise, prayer, atonement, and satisfaction.
Okay. And so right here, it's talking about purging the transgressions. So that's good, Diane. Thank you. And then the scene of 5-8 is where?
65.
Where are we in 65, 5-8? What is the scene? Where is it happening?
All of God's creation.
Right. So specifically, it talks about the mountain and sea, but it also talks about the entire world, his creation. Great. Mm-hmm. And so then he's the God of might. And in these verses, what acts of power are described? Anybody just raise your hand and tell me one of them. There's
Calms the sea
right?
and the waves.
Mm-hmm.
He holds the earth in place.
Right.
He establishes the mountains.
Strength.
He shows his strength.
He causes the sunrise and the sunset, the dawn and the sunset.
Yeah. East to west, the sun appears. But in the very beginning, it talks about he's the God of our salvation. And obviously that took a lot of power to do the work of salvation. And he's the one that we can trust through all of the earth, wherever we are and wherever he is working. That's our task, to see where he's working and join him in that work. Mm-hmm. But God's shows his righteousness, hope, strength, and calming. You often wonder if when Jesus stood up in the boat and said, "Peace, be still," and calmed the sea, if any of the disciples thought back to hear where he's, could still the noise of the roaring seas and the waves and things. So anyways, then number 5, it says, what's the scene of God's grace, or 9-13. So where is this happening?
On the earth.
Okay. What specific parts of the earth is it mentioned in these verses?
Farmers' field.
Okay, so pastures.
It's actually over the land.
Mm-hmm.
So that there can be harvest nourishment for the earth.
So it's talking about fields where things grow, pastures where sheep are, and then for 6, Deb started us out. He gives nourishment so that they can grow. Nourishment, that's growing nourishment.
New word.
And then, so like the grain, he takes care of. He sends what to help them grow? The water, the rain, right? And obviously he's got to show the sun because they were going to need that. And this just talks about like God gives us these blessings. And then at the end of the year, what is seen? What do farmers go out and do at the end of the year?
They
Harvest.
Harvest, right. And so there's the crops that grow and then they get the blessings from it. And then with the pastures being watered, the sheep have the grass they need to feed them or other livestock. And there is great rejoicing. And Elisa said, I love to drive through South Park, Colorado and see the herds of cattle and sometimes even elk out. They grace the land. It's even more beautiful. And so that like the corn is another thing here that talks about in the valley, the cornfields. I remember as a little kid going to visit my uncles and 2 of them had farms and we'd see the cornfields and be like, is that Uncle Irvin's cornfield? You know, because he had so many and we were just like, okay, when we got to seeing his, then we knew soon we'd be at his house.
Is that why they plant corn and potatoes? Give us ears to hear and eyes to see. I just now thought of it.
You should tell Alan that. He would enjoy that. So C.S. Lewis has a quote she put here. God's love encircles the year as with a crown. Each month has its gem, each day its pearl. Unceasing kindness girdles all time with a belt of love. The providence of God in its visitation makes a complete circuit and surrounds the year. God is the creator of all. He controls all things and all forces. So the wisdom we can get here is how wonderful is God's mercy and forgiveness, his great power, and his unending grace. So what I wrote in my journal was, I thank you for purging me from my transgressions. I'm so grateful that I can approach your throne in prayer. I look forward to seeing you on your throne in heaven. You are my salvation, my confidence, my strength, goodness, and power. You care for the earth and provide for people. I will rejoice in you. Don't you just love how David can talk about all the horrible things and the enemy, and then where does he end? How wonderful God is. I'm going to praise him for it. I'm going to trust him no matter what. Oh, that we would emulate him in that way. So do any of you have any other thoughts from this last chapter that you had and you want to share?